27 years ago, I think it was, Paul Kennedy wrote a book, Rise and Fall of the Great Powers. His thesis, when we Googled it, because I kind of remembered it, but not quite, was that great powers must be judged relative to other great powers, and great power indices correlate strongly with the use of natural resources and economic durability. And as I recall, he had lots of charts that, because it's, again, 27 years since I read it, but you remember the charts, man. If you get through, you remember the charts. Correlating strongly that per capita use of energy just went with economic development and great power status. Now, I think that's important in kind of this discussion here as regards energy and geopolitical issues. Now, that said, let me go to the next point. I think to forecast energy, no offense to any panelists, is a fool's game. Who would have predicted 1973? There was when I was elected 5-6 years ago to the Congress, there was a testimony given about peak oil. Now we have the shale play. 4 years ago, I was told, despite the kind of onset of shale play, that economic demand in India and China was going to drive up costs so high that despite the incipient oil play, there would nonetheless be prices so high that it would inhibit our economy. Now, prices are so low, we're not sure we can produce. So to predict something which is so regularly unpredictable doesn't seem the thing we should focus on. I think it's rather better to think of ourselves relative to other great powers. What made us a great power? How can we have the economic durability that allows us to sustain ourselves? And inevitably, I think Kennedy's thesis 27 years ago is still true. That relates in part to the ability to command and develop and produce natural resources, principally oil and gas is the discussion here today. Now, just to point this out, the fact that we have had both ultra-deep drilling in the Gulf of Mexico and the shale play in places such as Louisiana, Texas, the developments in North Dakota and Canada have lowered our gas prices directly or indirectly. Now, how has this impacted our geopolitical position? Because we are judged relative to others. Well, Venezuela, who hates us and formerly would use their money to fund groups that hated us, they need oil to be at $151 a barrel to balance their budget. Iran needs $131 a barrel to balance their budget. Russia needs $103 a barrel to balance their budget. And now Brent crude is going for $60 a barrel. And it appears it will do so for the next several years. Those geopolitical rivals are going to be undermined, not because we've pulled a single pistol out of the holster, but rather because we are pulling oil and gas out of the ground. Now, this clearly weakens those positions, their position relative to ours. Also important to note that 50% of Russia's annual budget is funded by oil and gas development. 50%. In fact, by the way, there's precedent for this. I remember when Saudi Arabia flooded the oil market during the Reagan administration, that's when the Soviet empire collapsed. They needed the money to maintain their military-industrial complex, and I remember seeing pictures of rusted tanks they could not afford to maintain. And so therefore, the Soviet empire fell. Now, it isn't, though, just undermining the economy of others, because, by the way, capitalism is not zero-sum. Some folks say, well, my gosh, we've got to keep all our oil and gas for ourselves because to allow others to have our low-price oil and gas is to take away the advantage our economy has and to transfer that advantage to another. Capitalism is not zero-sum. If the middle class worldwide gets richer, our middle class will be richer still. And that's the wonderful thing about freedom and markets, because most likely will continue to be the most free and market-oriented economy in the world. So, again, going back to the Reagan years, there was a worldwide recession. The United States consciously became the engine of economic growth that pulled Western Europe out of a recession. You can see our continued kind of not doing well has hurt the world economy. Of course it should. We are the largest economy in the world. And think about it. If we exported natural gas, which some people say, no, we cannot do because we have an advantage having that natural gas domestically and we don't want to transfer this gas to others, there is a significant transfer cost of both the cooling, compression to liquefy the natural gas, the transport to other countries, and the ability to bring that gas back up to where it can be used and then shipped to ultimate use. There's also the additional cost where the United States petrochemical plants have changed their feedstock from oil to natural gas. For petrochemical companies in Western Europe to do this, for example, they would have to invest the hundreds of millions of dollars we already have invested to do the same thing. So, arguably, if we export natural gas, we will not equilibrate, but we will make it better. And that is a good thing. When Europe is more prosperous, they buy more American goods. When China is more prosperous, they buy more American goods. We believe in markets, and our belief in markets should continue when it comes to the belief in markets of petrochemical. But let me take my thesis a little bit further. The durability of an economy. Right now, under this administration, the rich have gotten richer and the middle class have stagnant wages. Since 2009, if you've owned stocks, you've done pretty well. But since 2009, if you pull a wrench, you're not doing so well. There's a set of policies which is prejudicial against the middle class, the blue-collar workers, the working families, that this administration has instituted. Key example, Keystone XL pipeline, which would create 40,000 construction jobs. When those on the left minimize that by saying, well, they're temporary jobs, by definition, construction jobs are temporary unless we're building the Great Wall of China. But when you speak to those craft union presidents, they will say, my welder needs 3 weeks of straight work so that he can meet his union quarterly hour requirement and still qualify for benefits. I can go down the list, but it's so intuitive that Keystone XL pipeline creating 40,000 jobs according to President Obama's State Department is a good thing. I could also list, by the way, according to his State Department, it will decrease the carbon footprint, it will save lives in addition to those 40,000 jobs. All the things that theoretically we are all for. In this case, those who are pro-market are clearly more for them than those who oppose Keystone XL pipeline. Other examples I could give, though. Louisiana, Texas, North Dakota, Oklahoma, other energy-producing states have created over the last certain number of years an incredible number of blue-collar working jobs. Oil and gas industry, just some statistics. The American oil and natural gas industry supports 8.4 million full and part-time jobs. Since 2008, the oil and gas industry has created 208,900 direct jobs and an additional 600,000 indirect jobs. My dad moved to Louisiana in 1958, bouncing between different communities, never quite gaining traction. But he had heard that if he moved to Louisiana, he could sell to the men and women working at Esso, as ExxonMobil was then called, and could make a living. My dad ended up making a great living. A man without a college education, his son's a U.S. Senator. The power of the industry is it created opportunity for my dad, who sold life insurance. The ripple effect of this is tremendous. Now, if Paul Kennedy's thesis is correct, that great powers must be judged vis-a-vis one another, and also as regards their use of natural resources, specifically fossil fuel, and their economic durability, I would argue that if we are going to continue to be a great power, we know developing our own oil and gas resources undermines the economies of our enemies, promotes the economies of our friends. It contributes to working class, middle class prosperity in this country, which in turn contributes to our economic durability. All of that, which is a recipe for us to maintain great power status. By the way, not for the sake of being a great power, but for the sake of those families that otherwise would not do as well would we not have these policies in place. I'll stop, take whatever questions you have.